Fantastic, and this is why he talks about Asabiyyah.
Yeah.
Oh, very
Asabiyyah,
important,
Asabiyyah.
because what makes the culture or the desert, like the Bedouins, people who are still dealing with water and food and shelter and grazing grounds, they have a cohesiveness that the people in cities may not necessarily have.
Social cohesion.
Yes, and he calls this, he terms it, and it's very important because religious audiences may see it as a negative thing, because Asabiyyah in Islamic tradition is a negative thing.
Can you explain this, Azy? Honestly, I must say, because you mentioned that exactly. I mean, when I was reading that and I read him using the Arabic term Asabiyyah, which Rasulullah in a hadith actually mentions of being something negative.
Yeah.
Ibn Khaldun, he changes the meaning of certain words.
Yes.
And this is a typical example, which, to be honest, it bugs me a bit. You know, he uses Asabiyyah, he could have used another word.
He could
but
have,
he
yes.
did take Asabiyyah, which nowadays we can call nationalism.
Yes.
He uses it and changes it into something positive, making it a virtue actually, which I have really a problem with.
I would just, before you carry on, with regards to what Doctor said, I would like to add to that he doesn't necessarily say it's a good thing. From my perspective, it's a necessary thing
it's
for
a
the
necessity.
establishment of a dynasty of a state.
Okay, that would make more sense. Yes, actually what you're saying now is true. He doesn't say, it's more descriptive. He actually just uses it to describe that that's what's going on.
Again, we have to, and you mentioned at the beginning of these beautiful talks, that we need to know the author. He isn't just an average Muslim talking about, for example, a Muslim today saying that we need Asabiyyah. He doesn't have any grounding in Islamic history, Islamic science, in Islamic fiqh, hadith, seerah, aqidah. You may say this is nationalism, pure and simple. Ibn Khaldun was a qadi, in fact the greatest qadi in Egypt, so there's no way he would be promoting something that was going against basic principles in Islam. He knew about the hadith of Asabiyah, he knew this.
This video is sponsored by the Muqaddima program. For nearly 7 centuries, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah has been read and studied by scholars and students of history, sociology, politics and economics as the single most authoritative and astounding work of classical scholarship in the field of history. Embark on an enlightening educational venture led by Muslim scholars and teachers delving into Islamic history, sociology, economics and beyond. Engage with cutting-edge learning cues and multimedia components, allowing for a deeper understanding of the topics. Distinguish between the lies and the truths of the narratives told, between reliable and unreliable sources. Equip yourself with the skills to conduct deep research and build confidence to combat Islamophobia. Come and strengthen your Muslim identity today. Grab the course in the video description.
The Prophet ﷺ told his companions, abandon this, abandon
So why did
Asabiyyah.
he use another term?
It's
instead of
because
using
it's
Asabiyyah?
it's the way he coined it. Because Asabiyyah, in the classical sense, Asabiyyah, as it was taken in the context of the hadith, where it's being discouraged, it was to support your tribe when they're committing wrong, to be indiscriminate in your support for your tribe. In effective, I'm wrong and I'm going to be wrong, but I'll support my tribe regardless of right and wrong. Now, Ibn Khaldun mentions that Asabiyyah in his new science is an integral part of the Bedouin civilization because they need one another. They're living in the elements, they have scarce resources, there are other competing tribes. So they have something that ties them together, a communal sense of a unity and purpose and bond. He calls it Asabiyyah, social cohesion.
Exactly, absolutely. I think that was, I was playing a little bit devil's advocate. It's very important to see actually that point of his understanding of Asabiyyah. In contrast to the way we're living, you mentioned it very, very nicely. I mean, individualism, that is what plays a role nowadays, where everybody is their own individual, everybody's their own person, and they're just looking at their selfish needs.
Ananiya, selfishness.
So you're not looking, you're not looking further. This in itself is prevalent in a decadent society, a society that is about to decline. This, again, by the way, I read another interesting article with regards to the European Union using as the principle and understanding of Ibn Khaldun's Asabiyyah, calling it social cohesion, as you just mentioned, actually mentioning that it's extremely important that our European citizens nowadays have lost this Asabiyyah feeling towards their own governments and people around them. So we need to bring it back again, subhanAllah.
And this is what we have, citizenship tests, for example, in the UK. And they teach it in schools. There's actually now, there are programs to teach children about the importance of citizenship, to be a part of society, to have a social cohesion. Simply because what Ibn Khaldun mentions is the Bedouins have this by necessity. They have to have this, otherwise they perish.
And they wouldn't survive.
Yes. For example, let's say a townsman, somebody who lives in London. You don't necessarily have to have a backing of your family to protect you because the police is there, the fire service is there, right? There are authorities, the government fills in for you. You don't need family support. Whereas if you live in a remote part of the country, you need family support because something happens to you.
Becomes a necessity.
So that cohesive mentality amongst the Bedouins makes them stronger. Whereas the city-dwelling decadent, they then become almost susceptible to the attack of the stronger. And he mentions the Mongols coming in, sweeping over Baghdad.
Yes.
All of that is important because we're seeing again, as you mentioned, nation states are mentioning that there's a need to have this cohesiveness. So in that perspective, it's not a negative thing. Because if you look at, for example, when the Muhajirin left Mecca, came to Medina, there was a sense of Asabiyyah in that under the umbrella of Islam and as an Ummah, a unity, a bond, like kept them together.
But he does mention that as well.
Yes.
He does say Asabiyyah with religion, he means Islam.
Yes.
Whenever he means religion and translation again, as we said,
Yeah.
with Islam brings basically the Ummayyads out, the Abbasids and so on, and he goes deeper into them and he says basically that's exactly why we had them, because they had this feeling, they came from the desert. Okay, they had this feeling of closeness, and then Islam gave them actually a much bigger push. Suddenly they were out there in the world.
Yes.
This is something that I would definitely use Ibn Khaldun to analyze previous dynasties before him, definitely.
And he's
I
very
mean, don't
good.
forget that he was alive until the 1400s, where the Ottoman Empire had come up already. So, mashallah. So basically, we have with him, and that's why we're doing it in our program also. We're looking at the Seerah from Rasulullah over the Khilafah Rashidin all the way to the Ottoman Empire, so the last caliphate basically. We're looking at all the dynasties and caliphates that we can look at in the Islamic world, mashallah.
And it's a matter of, again, it's the proper conveyance. The proper and appropriate conveyance, because again, Assabiyah automatically, to a religious audience, is a negative thing in all instances. But keep in mind, because again, Ibn Khaldun knew the Seerah, he knew the Hadith, he could not have overlooked that. Right? There's no way he could have overlooked that. It's just he chose the wrong word perhaps, he could have chosen another word. But even in battles, when the Prophet ﷺ was leading armies, he would put tribes in units together.
Yeah.
Because he knew that if your fellow tribesman is being attacked, you're more likely to try and help him. If it was just a matter of any other Muslim, there's a bit of a, but if you are fighting with your brothers and your tribesmen and your clan, there are two things. Number one, there's a competition. The Prophet ﷺ would call, oh Banu so-and-so, oh Banu so-and-so, and they'd compete in the battlefield to collect more points. So that was a strategy number one, because of the tribal connection. Secondly, if you're seeing your own tribesmen being killed, you would not retreat, because this is your tribe. There's a bond stronger than just
blood is thicker than water.
Exactly.
Yes.
So he utilized that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's an example of Asabiyyah in that sense being useful. And we know the Banu, Aus and Khazraj were Muslims, formidable Muslim, but still there was an element of a tribal understanding and identity amongst them, that still lingered. So again, the word Asabiyyah has to be taken in the right context, and Ibn Khaldun, I believe, took it in that context, that it is useful and it's been proven to be useful. The Mongols being the great example, and also the Al-Muhads and Murabitun, great examples of a desert people, who we should talk about now, the desert people and the sedentary cultures and everything else. But it's important to keep that in mind, simply because in Islam, as you said, Dr. Steph, we have a greater sense of Asabiyyah, which is faith-based. Once you have that greater sense of unity, cohesion as Muslims, it's really a formidable power. And the Muslims are sleeping at this moment, not realizing how much is possible if we reawaken a sort of Asabiyyah based on faith, which is basically the Ummah, right? And people know this, the right people know this, but it's not awakened.
You know who knows that?
And
you are absolutely right. The Muslims are sleeping. The French colonialists, the English colonialists, the nowadays Americans,
United States of America,
they
United
know
Kingdom,
this
United Nations,
They
United.
Yes.
Of course.
There you go, there you go. They imposed their culture, civilization, languages on the Muslims. And nowadays, an Algerian has to speak French in order to be considered cultured and civilized, right?
Yes.
And the French themselves, actually, of that time, had to read Ibn Khaldun to understand.
Yes,
what
to
was
understand
happening.
exactly.
Subhanallah, you know.
Exactly.
Look, I mean, that's dumb, I would say, honestly. That's dumb from a Muslim perspective. You know, they have Muslims out there who don't understand the treasure that they have in their head, the gold that they have, and they just give it away. They just throw it away, subhanAllah.
And Ibn Khaldun understood. You know, I think in the modern world, we may be considered the Bedouins, really. The Muslims today are considered the Bedouins in the modern sense. We are not the decadent city-dwelling, you know. We are the Bedouins, but the Bedouins have the Asabiyyah based on Islam. It's only a matter of time until these Bedouins, if they awaken to this sense of Asabiyyah based on Islam again, they could literally do what happened in the past, where sleeping giants are awakened suddenly, and they devour the decadence and
that's exactly what the West fears. That's exactly what certain countries fear.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why you will have these kind of attitudes that we have nowadays. You know, absolutely, mashallah.
So let's talk about the desert culture.
You mentioned that. I'd just like to spearhead with yes. So he speaks about sedentary and desert people, so which he would call Bedouins. He has many subdivisions of them, but again, that's a bit too detailed to go into. But he has subdivisions of both. But he speaks about sedentary and desert people, which he dubs Bedouins. First of all, they are not separations. They're not like two separate peoples at odds with each other. It's very interesting because he mentions that they are in a cooperative relationship. Basis of civilization is the countryside, and civilization grows from out of there. But the cities, the sedentary people, are needed for civilization to be maintained.
Yes.
So they're in a relationship, a positive relationship, not necessarily negative, but it's a positive relationship between the sedentary people and the Bedouin, the desert people. So that I found that very interesting in the sense that there is more parts at the lower level of a state, and for him to think of that and to put that out there clearly is, again, mashallah, as we said.
The Ummayyads you mentioned, I mean, don't forget where they came from, right? I mean, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, don't forget that Syria and the whole Sham area and region played such an important role actually for civilization before already, when it was part of the Byzantine Empire, right? The Byzantines. And then after that, you had, of course, the Muslims coming in and playing such a big role. Muawiyah taken over. So yeah, all this very, very important. I mean, all these things that you mentioned are quite important and quite significant to see how things developed and how Ibn Khaldun looked at that and properly and correctly put actually on in a book, mashallah. I mean, yeah, it's something we need to look,
yeah.
Especially what we're doing in the program as well, that we're going into these different dynasties and into these different regions where we are going to analyze actually how they developed as a nation as well. And the Ummayyads, of course, is a good example. Of course, the Abbasids take over. The Abbasids had hundreds of years to actually develop that. With all the difficulties and the problems that they had, as well as the Ummayyads had difficulties and problems as well.
It is amazing. He made a full. It's really, when you read it, it's like like a sociologist. You're reading a work from a sociologist. He made a serious study with regards to the separation between sedentary and the Bedouin desert people, further splitting the Bedouin people into mobile and limitedly mobile peoples under the Bedouin section. But I would like to also mention that one of his methodologies is that to understand people's lifestyles, you look at their economic situation, you look at their economic dealings to understand their lifestyle, and then that leads to understanding how they behave, their habits. He's very deterministic in the sense that, for example, with habits, that the habits determine a person. That's it, and you get your habits from the environment. He's very, as AZ mentioned, with regards to the nature-nurture debate, you could argue that he's very nurture. He's very much on the nurture side of the debate.
Absolutely, yes, he is. He does mention, of course, the environment, the importance of the environment, maybe rather an analysis than judgment. So it's very difficult. I don't think we can say that he's rather on the nature side or the nurture side than the nature side. A bit difficult to say, but he does mention both, definitely. And as you said, I mean, he's a very 21st century, I would say, a very modern way of thinker from their perspective. You know, he has no real understanding because of the lack of traveling. He didn't come across people. I mean, he was living in North Africa, and the society he knew really was the most North African society, which was quite homogeneous. I mean, there were Berbers and Arabs. That's, you know, and then during his time, by the way, there was also this influx of Arab tribes that were coming actually to North Africa.
Up to North Africa.
Okay? So it was Arabs who were actually entering North Africa en masse. And this is something that influenced his way of thinking as well. Shortly before him, by the way, was the big Mongol invasion of Baghdad, the destruction of Baghdad in the 13th century, mid-13th century. That affected him and the way he looks at people, he looked at societies and people's message as well.
As well as the encroaching Christian kingdoms at the north of Al-Andalus.
In Al-Andalus, yes, he does. All this, and it's all mentioned in this book. It's all there. And that's why, in order to understand this book, you need to know
the historical
circumstances.
Context.
Absolutely.
Brilliantly, yes.
And this actually is mentioned.
For almost 7 centuries, the Muqaddimah has been widely regarded as the earliest and most authoritative and seminal text in the fields of sociology and history, outlining the core principles and methods needed to evaluate and convey history with a more objective and critical eye. Its celebrated author, Ibn Khaldun, pioneered a revolutionary approach to the study of history and is considered by some historians to be one of the most influential thinkers in his field. Now, for the very first time, students of Islamic history will have the rare and unique opportunity to study this monumental and classical work of genius under the tutelage and guidance of experts in the field of research and education. We offer a wide and varied range of learning experiences as part of the program, with options for students to participate in person during our on-site lessons in London or remotely via our private and secured live streaming platform. Classes are delivered on a fortnightly basis, and all students enrolling onto the program shall receive a complete learning resource pack, including coursebooks, timetables, and admission onto the online student portal. The annual program is available to students as a certificate or a diploma package, with varying subjects and module components, as well as a practical assessment unit that will culminate in the launch of student-led history projects and publications, following a panel presentation before a group of assessors. This is a unique opportunity to discover and immerse yourself into the world of Islamic historiography under the tutelage and guidance of experts who will assist you in acquiring the core skills and competencies necessary to conduct your own research and launch your own initiatives. To find out more about the Muqaddimah program or to enlist yourself onto this unique and fantastic learning journey, please visit our website at www.al-Muqaddima.com, where you will be able to download our program prospectus, register your interest by submitting an application directly via the online enrollment form.